Hello everybody. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we'll be discussing the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 18th January 2020. Topics to be discussed are displayed on the screen and timestamping for the same are given in the description box below. So let's start. The Supreme Court of India has sought a response from the central government to a petition that has highlighted the failure of the government to implement the National E-Mobility Mission Plan 2020 that was launched in 2013. Now, in this context, this news appears on page number 9 under the title Government Failed in E-Mobility Mission Says Plea in Supreme Court. Court seeks response from Centre and becomes important both from the perspective of prelims and mains examination under the heads Environment and Science and Technology. Now, with an aim to make a switch to electric vehicle in India, the National E-Mobility Mission Plan 2020 was launched in 2013 with a target of increasing the electric vehicle sale to the tune of about 6 to 7 million by 2020. Now, accordingly, under the National E-Mobility Mission Plan, the government has notified a number of schemes including FAME 1 and FAME 2 in order to accelerate the manufacturing of electric vehicles in India. Now, against the target of 6 to 7 million electric vehicle sales, the government has achieved only 0.263 million electric vehicle sale in the last 7 years, reflecting the failure of government to effectively implement the National E-Mobility Mission Plan. Now, accordingly, a petition was filed in the Supreme Court highlighting the failure of the government to implement the scheme, for which the Supreme Court has sought Centre's response as the failure to implement the National E-Mobility Mission Plan has led to increasing levels of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions in the country and has violated the fundamental rights of citizens to clean environment guaranteed under Article 14 and 21. Now, accordingly, as a part of this news analysis, let us understand the need for electric vehicle switch in India, various steps that the government has taken including the National E-Mobility Mission Plan, the challenges to make an electric vehicle switch in India, and the way forward in order to reduce the gasoline run engines and consequently make an electric vehicle switch. So let us understand these issues one by one. Now, before we understand the details of National E-Mobility Mission Plan and the various schemes that have been launched as a part of this mission document, let us first understand the importance of making an electric vehicle transition in India. Now, in order to limit the rising temperature to 1.5 degree of the pre-industrial levels, under the Paris Agreement, India has committed to 3 specific targets including reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, switching to clean sources of power generation, and improving the carbon sink. Now, accordingly, India has committed to reduce its greenhouse gas emission intensity to 30 to 35% below 2005 levels by 2030. Now, in addition, India has also committed to switching to non-fossil fuel sources of power generation up to 40%. Now, in addition, India will also create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by increasing its forest and tree cover by 2030. Now, as it is clear, in order to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by 30 to 35% from 2005 levels, it is imperative for India to make a switch to electric vehicles, as about 99.9% of the vehicular fleet in India is run by fossil fuels. Now, besides, it should be noted that as a result of rapid urbanization, the transport demand in India has grown almost to about 8 times since 1980s, and as identified in the first Global Mobility Summit that was held recently in India, two of the most important challenges of urban India are pollution and congestion. Besides, vehicular pollution is one of the most important contributors to PM 2.5 ambient air pollution that has been highlighted by various reports, including the Global Environment Outlook of UNEP recently. Besides, in accordance with the State of Global Air Report 2019, air pollution is the fifth leading risk factor for mortality worldwide. Now, with India having one of the highest mortality burden due to air pollution across the world, it is imperative for us to make the electric vehicle transition, as vehicular pollution is one of the leading causes of ambient air pollution in India. Now, in addition, the electric vehicles are far more efficient compared to the internal combustion engines, in that the efficiency of gasoline run engines is only about 20% compared to 85% in case of electric vehicles. Now, this simply means whereas in a gasoline engine, only 20% of the energy stored in the fuel makes it to the wheels, in electric vehicles, about 85% of the energy stored in the battery will be converted into motion of the vehicle. Now, besides, the Supreme Court appointed Environment Pollution Control Authority has identified vehicular pollution as one of the main reasons for pollution in Delhi NCR, and one of the steps recommended by EPCA under the Comprehensive Action Plan is the introduction of battery operated vehicles in two-wheeler and three-wheeler segments. Now, besides, as you must be aware, about 80% of India's oil requirement comes from imports. Now, as a result, switch to electric vehicles will reduce the import burden on India and thereby its current account deficit. Now, besides, India has taken a number of steps recently in order to liberalize the coal sector, including privatization of coal mines, opening up FDI in coal mines, and also ending the captive coal mining regime, which is set to increase the total coal production in India, thereby increasing the power generation required for the electric vehicle switch. Now, as the liberalization of coal sector is expected to increase the power generated in India, the electricity generation scenario is going to be conducive for making this electric vehicle transition in the country. Now, given the importance of making a transition to the electric vehicles in India, the government has been taking a number of steps starting from 2010, when the government launched the National E-Mobility Mission with an outlay of 94 crore to incentivize the electric vehicle manufacturing in India. However, this mission that was launched in 2010 was discontinued in 2012, and a renewed version of National Electric Mobility Mission 2020 was launched in 2013 with an aim to provide impetus to the electric mobility ecosystem, including manufacturing, charging infrastructure, fleet operators and service providers of electric vehicles. Now, under the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan 2020, the government targeted to increase the electric vehicle sales to about 6 to 7 million by 2020, as mentioned before. Now, eventually, the government also set a target of 100% switch to electric vehicles by 2030. However, this target was revised in 2018 to 30%, given the various challenges in electric vehicle ecosystem in India. Now, under the National Electric Mobility Mission Plan, the Department of Heavy Industry formulated a scheme called FAME-1 in 2015, which is short for Faster Adoption and Manufacturing of Hybrid and Electric Vehicles in India. Now, FAME-1 was aimed at promoting the manufacturing of both electric and hybrid vehicle technology with 4 pillars, including demand creation, technology platform, pilot project, and charging infrastructure. Now, besides, FAME-1 was aimed at incentivizing all vehicle segments, including two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler vehicles, and also buses. Now, while FAME-1 was introduced initially for a period of 2 years till 2017, the implementation of this scheme got extended to 2019. Now, based on the experience gained in the first phase of this FAME scheme, FAME-2 was recently launched in March 2019, giving impetus to charging infrastructure that is much necessary for electric vehicle transition in India. Now, besides, as I have mentioned, recently the government has revised the target of electric vehicle switch to 30% under the National E-Mobility Mission Plan. In addition, in August 2019, the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways has set a target for complete switch to electric vehicles in the two-wheeler and three-wheeler segment by 2025 and 2023 respectively. Now, it is important to note that the details under National E-Mobility Mission Plan 2020 is important from the perspective of prelims examination, particularly details with respect to targets and revised targets under NEMMP and FAME scheme. Now, however, as highlighted in the petition, the implementation of National E-Mobility Mission Plan has been a failure as the targets of NEMMP is far from achieved, in that in the last 7 years, against the target of 6 to 7 million sales of electric vehicles, only 0.263 million electric vehicles have been sold in India. Now, coming to the challenges for electric vehicle switch in India, one of the main challenges is the limitation of lithium ion batteries on which the current fleet of electric vehicles are completely dependent on. Now, among the limitations of the lithium ion batteries are extremely expensive and are not suitable for long distance travel, hindering the growth of electric vehicles. Now, this is on account of the weight of the lithium ion batteries, which makes up the bulk of the weight of the cars, which is about 500 kilos. Now, in addition, the lithium ion batteries use lithium, cobalt, nickel, and manganese, which are in short supply in the world and restricted to what is known as lithium triangle, that is Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, and has thus given rise to a resource crunch for development of lithium ion batteries. Now, as I've already mentioned, the charging infrastructure as identified with the experience of FAME 1 is one of the major challenges for transition to electric vehicles. Now, besides, India also lacks the battery recycling infrastructure, leading to short supply of lithium ion batteries for the electric vehicles. Now, in addition, it should be noted that there is also a fear of job losses in the MSMEs that largely depend on the automotive parts in the current IC engines. Now, this is because the electric vehicles have less number of moving parts compared to the gasoline run IC engines, which have about 2000 movable parts, while the electric vehicles only have about 20 moving parts, which is said to hurt the MSMEs, leading to job losses. Now, this fear of job loss is another factor in development of electric vehicle manufacturing space in India. Now, given these challenges, Niti Aayog recently has proposed a roadmap for complete switch to electric vehicles by 2030 and development of electric vehicle ecosystem in the coming decade. Now, the roadmap of Niti Aayog includes a 360-degree approach, including the major pillars of phasing out the gasoline vehicles. In that, the Niti Aayog has proposed that the Ministry of Road Transport and Highways shall prepare a framework to phase out the sale of diesel and petrol vehicles by 2030. In addition, the Niti Aayog also proposes the ministry to issue a notification to radio cab services such as Ola and Uber to convert 40% of its fleet to electric vehicles by 2026. Now, besides, Niti Aayog also proposes a complete switch to electric vehicles by 2030 of government vehicular fleet. Now, as the second pillar, the Niti Aayog proposes a gigascale battery manufacturing ecosystem in India. Now, under this, the plan is to manufacture at least 50 gigawatt hour batteries by 2030, for which the Niti Aayog proposes an incentive of about 8,000 crore every year to the manufacturers of lithium-ion batteries. Now, in addition, recently ISRO has launched a technology transfer program under which ISRO will provide free technology transfer to startups that are working in the lithium-ion battery manufacturing space. Now, besides, on the lines of e-highways in Sweden and Germany, India should have a pilot e-highways program under which select national highways will be converted to e-highways, which has an overhead electricity network, so that the trucks and the buses that ply on these highways use these pantographs similar to trains on these highways. Now, in addition, given the resource crunch in the raw material to the manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries, India should step up its engagement with the Latin American countries, especially the lithium triangle countries of Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile, in order to gain sufficient access to lithium, cobalt, nickel, and manganese. Now, thus, given the challenges to electric vehicle transition, India should revise its target from 2020 to 2030 and focus on the roadmap that is given by Niti Aayog to develop an ecosystem before making the actual transition to electric vehicles in India. Now, accordingly, if India successfully makes a complete switch to electric vehicle by 2030, it is said that India can reduce 64% of its energy demand for road sector by 2030. Besides, India can also reduce about 37% of carbon emissions in line with its commitment to the Paris Agreement. In addition, it will also reduce about 150 million tons of gasoline consumption, saving up about 4 lakh crores according to present oil prices, thereby reducing the import burden of India and consequent current account deficit. Now, the topic on electric vehicles is extremely important, particularly from the perspective of mains examination. Thus, I have discussed various dimensions, including the need for electric vehicle switch, the steps taken, the challenges for electric vehicle switch, and the way forward as given by the Niti Aayog roadmap, which recommends that India should prepare for the electric vehicle switch in this decade and revise its target for complete switch from 2020 to 2030 and use this decade in order to develop the electric vehicle ecosystem that will have large scale impact on India's energy security, carbon emissions, and also air pollution in India. Now, based on our discussion on electric vehicle switch in India, you may attempt this mains question, which reads: identify the challenges to the development of electric vehicles manufacturing in India. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, in a significant step, ISRO has launched a high-powered communication satellite GSAT-30 on board Ariane 5 from European Space Agency's spaceport in French Guiana. Now, in this context, this news appears on page number 9 and becomes important mainly from the perspective of prelims examination, where often questions are asked based on Indian satellite system, including the communication satellite system, the remote sensing satellite system, and the regional navigation system. So before we discuss this topic, let us have a look at some of the questions that have been asked related to Indian satellite systems. Now, this question related to the application of Indian remote satellite system was asked in the year 2015, in which the question expected you to know the application of remote sensing satellite system. Now, in 2016, as you can see, there was a question on AstroSat, in that the details of this satellite was asked, including the weight of this satellite and the orbit in which the satellite was launched. So accordingly, we will discuss these aspects of GSAT-30 that are relevant mainly from the perspective of prelims examination. Now, GSAT-30 is mainly a high-powered communication satellite that is set to replace INSAT-4A in order to ensure an enhanced coverage of the communication satellite, in that the coverage of GSAT-30 extends from Indian mainland to Gulf countries to various countries in South and Southeast Asia and Australia. Being a communication satellite, GSAT-30 has a heavy payload of 3 class ton, in that it weighs around 3,357 kilos. Besides, the main application of this high-powered communication satellite includes DTH services, VSAT services, mainly for the purposes of banking, particularly providing connectivity to the ATM networks. Now, it should be noted that it may not be necessary to remember the specific applications of GSAT-30, but if a question is asked on the INSAT series, which is primarily the communication satellite system of India, you may take hints from such news and answer questions based on applications of communication satellite system. Now, besides being a communication satellite, GSAT-30 will be launched in geostationary orbit, which is at a height of approximately 36,000 kilometers from the surface of the Earth. Besides, it is also important to note that the GSAT-30 provides communication services in the frequency bands of C-band and Ku bands. Now, before we look at different frequency bands that are used for communication satellites, let us have a look at the mechanism in which a communication satellite is put in the geostationary orbit. Now, as it is well known, a geostationary orbit is the one in which a spacecraft appears to be stationary with respect to Earth, or in other words, the spacecraft that is launched in a geostationary orbit is set to hover around a fixed point with respect to Earth. Now, satellites in the geostationary orbits are primarily used for communication purposes for the reason that the ground-based receivers on the surface of the Earth are fixed in a particular direction for them to receive signals from these satellites at all times. Now, in order to understand this, let us take an example of a DTH service that is being provided by a communication satellite. Now, as it is well known, a ground-based antenna, which is basically a parabolic reflector that you can see in your dish antennas, are fixed with respect to the latitudes in which they are present. Now, since the orientation of these parabolic reflectors, which has the receiver to receive the signals from the satellite, cannot be changed very often, the natural choice for communication satellite is a geostationary orbit which appears to be at a fixed point in the sky from a particular position on the surface of the Earth. Now, however, one disadvantage of putting the communication satellites in the geostationary orbit at a height of about 36,000 km is that the power of the receivers should be extremely high, and thus the frequency bands of the communication satellites are usually in the range of 4 to 8 GHz, 12 to 18 GHz and 26 to 40 GHz. Now, coming to how these satellites are launched, given that the satellites should appear at a fixed point in the sky from a reference point on Earth, there are two criteria that have to be met, including the orbit of this satellite has to be exactly above the equator, and two, the angular velocity of the satellite must exactly match with the rotation of the Earth. Now, besides, one of the major challenges in launching a satellite to a geostationary orbit is the altitude, which is equal to 36,000 km, as I have discussed. Now, in order to do this, what is generally done is that the satellites use what is known as a geostationary transfer orbit or Hohmann transfer orbit as an intermediate orbit before it is launched to the geostationary orbit. Now, while the geostationary orbit is a near circular orbit, a geostationary transfer orbit is a highly elliptical orbit, as we can see in this figure. Now, the perigee of a geostationary orbit is in the range of about 250 to 300 kilometers, and the apogee, which is the farthest point, is around 36,000 kilometers, which is the orbital distance of a geostationary orbit. So, as it is evident, a satellite is launched from the surface of the Earth to a parking orbit, which is a circular orbit at the height equal to the perigee of the calculated geostationary transfer orbit. Now, once the satellite reaches the perigee of this geostationary transfer orbit, the satellite is basically propelled by a liquid apogee motor, commonly called as LAM, in order to put the communication satellite along this elliptical orbit and thence to the geostationary orbit at around 36,000 kilometers. Now, coming to the frequency bands of communication satellites, the radio frequency bands that the communication satellites operate in include the C band, the Ku band and the Ka band. C band usually operates within the frequency of about 4 to 8 GHz. It is primarily used for voice and data communication. Now, since the frequency in the C band is lower, it usually requires a larger ground antenna. Now, as a result, it provides lower transmission powers but over wider geographical areas as it is stationed in the geostationary orbit. Now, coming to the Ku band usually operates within the frequency band of 12 to 18 GHz. With higher frequency, it is typically used for DTH services, tele-education applications, etc. Now, since the frequency it operates in is much higher than that of a C band, the antenna sizes are much smaller in case of Ku band, and therefore This frequency band is more suitable for applications like DTH. Now, the Ka band usually operates within the frequency of 26 to 40 gigahertz. Now, operating in such high frequency bands, it has high transmission speed and thus a significant data transfer rate, and the data is received using a small ground based receivers or handheld equipments due to its higher frequency band. Now, given that the receivers are extremely small, they can be used for broadband services and also military networks where small handheld equipments may be used in order to receive the satellite data. Now, as I have mentioned, this topic is mainly important from the perspective of a prelims examination, especially the application of communication satellites and the frequency bands of communication satellites, as I have discussed here. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, this news appears on page number 2 and relates to a fresh round of recruitment in the recently established National Cyber Forensic Lab that was established as a part of the I4C scheme of Ministry of Home Affairs, which is short for Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Center. That is a state-of-art institution which deals with cyber forensics, cyber investigation, cyber research and innovation in the country. Now, accordingly, this topic becomes important mainly from the perspective of mains examination under the head security, and also certain facts relating to some institutions are important from the perspective of prelims examination. Now, according to the National Crime Records Bureau, the number of cybercrime cases in India have increased from about 9,600 in 2014 to about 12,300 in 2016. Now, in this backdrop, the government in the last 4 years has been taking a number of steps in order to deal with the increasing online cybercrime and to establish public trust in the digital world. Now, accordingly, the Ministry of Home Affairs had constituted an expert group for a detailed study and initiation and creation of a cybercrime coordination center that holistically deals with cyber forensics, investigation, research and innovation, threat analytics and cyber training. Now, accordingly, in February 2019, the Ministry of Home Affairs launched the Cybercrime Investigation Center, known as the Indian Cybercrime Investigation Center, in short for I4C scheme, under which a number of institutions were established, including the National Cyber Forensic Lab and the CyPAD under Delhi Police, which is short for Cyber Prevention Awareness and Detection Center. Now, in this context, as a part of this news analysis, let us briefly have a look at the different types of cyber crimes in India and a number of steps that the government has taken in order to tackle cyber crimes in the recent past. Now, coming to the types of cyber crimes in India, they can be categorized under 4 heads. 1 is against individuals, 2 cybercrimes against property, 3 cybercrime against government, and cybercrime against society. Now, under cybercrime against individuals, stalking, hacking, cracking, defamation, fraud, etc. are commonly perpetrated. Now, under this, I'll be discussing a few terms which are not very familiar. In that, cracking refers to digitally removing the copyright protection code which prevents copied or pirated software from working on computers which do not have the software owner's authorization. Phishing is often seen in news. It commonly involves sending spam emails to the user while claiming to be an established entity in order to obtain the user's personal information and steal user's identity. Eventually, the identity fraud may lead to the financial frauds. Now, coming to cybercrime against property, transmitting virus including Trojan horse, time bomb, logic bomb, rabbit, bacterium, etc. are some of the examples. Besides, cyber squatting is a cybercrime against property in that when 2 or more persons claim the same domain name, it is known as cyber squatting. Cyber vandalism involves the destruction of data on any electronic medium during the period when the network service is not available. In addition, the IPR crimes are very common, which involves online piracy, software piracy, infringement of patents, designs, trademark, copyright, theft of source codes, etc. Cyber warfare and cyber terrorism are classified as cyber crimes against government. Cyber warfare is basically an internet-based war or conflict to disable the official websites and networks of a sovereign. The targets usually are critical infrastructure, including the power grids, the financial institutions, the nuclear facilities, and also involves leakage of sensitive information. Besides, cyber terrorism is an act of creating fear in the mind of people by using internet as a medium. Cyber terrorism is defined under section 66F of the Information Technology Act of 2002. Coming to cybercrime against society, online gambling, which is illegal all over India except Sikkim, in that the gambling is generally prohibited in India under the Public Gambling Act of 1867. In addition, trafficking involves dealing in illegal trade activities such as trafficking of women, slaves, or children using internet as a medium. Now, the detailed definitions of various cyber crimes are given in the PDF, so you may refer the same. Now, as to the steps to curb cybercrime, the government in the last 4 years has taken a number of steps, including a setting up of Interministerial Committee on Phone Frauds in 2014, the Cybercrime Against Women and Child scheme, under which online cybercrime reporting portal has been operationalized. Now, as I have mentioned, the Ministry of Home Affairs has launched the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center scheme, which deals with forensics, investigation, research and innovation, threat analytics and training. Accordingly, under I4C, the National Cyber Forensic Lab was established in February 2019. Now, as I have discussed, this topic is important mainly from the perspective of General Studies Paper 3 Security, and the details of different types of cyber crimes and the steps that I have discussed here are given in the PDF and may be used as a ready reckoner in answering the related questions in the mains examination. Now, with this, let's move to the next news. Now, this news appears on page number 13 and relates to the possible visit of the US President Donald Trump to India in the third week of February, and thus is a news in transition. Now, accordingly, we will cover this issue as and when the President of United States visits India. Now, but of particular importance in this news item is a blue dot network rating mechanism that may be important from the perspective of prelims examination. So let us see what this Blue Dot network is. Now, in November 2019, US, Japan and Australia entered into a multi-stakeholder initiative that seeks to grade the infrastructure projects, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, as I have mentioned, it's a multi-stakeholder initiative, including the US Overseas Private Investment Corporation, the Australia's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Japan's Bank of International Cooperation. Now, the Blue Dot network mechanism basically grades infrastructure projects and would act as a quality seal which would encourage private investments in infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific region. Now, while the Blue Dot network mechanism is compared with the Belt and Road initiatives, it is fundamentally different from BRI in that under BRI, the public funds and loans for the projects are extended by the Chinese government. On the other hand, Blue Dot network does not involve direct funding of public funds. Rather, it is a rating mechanism that would attract private investment in the infrastructure projects. So, as I mentioned, this topic becomes extremely important from the perspective of prelims examination. Now, besides, in the backdrop of Indo-US 2+2 talks in December, we had taken stock of the Indo-US relations in general, and I would suggest you to go through the DNS analysis of 18th December 2019 for the same. Now, with this, let's take up the practice questions. Now, this question is framed on the basis of this news that appears on page number 8 that relates to the classical dance Mohiniyattam. Now, such questions are often asked in the prelims examination, in that in the year 2016, a question on Kallaripayattu was asked, Accordingly, this question reads, Mohiniyattam is a classical dance of which of the following states? The correct answer is Kerala, and therefore A is the right option. Now coming to question number 2, consider the following statements about GSAT-30. GSAT-30 is communication satellite launched in the lower Earth orbit, which is the wrong option, as being a communication satellite, the natural choice of orbit is the geostationary orbit. The second option reads, GSAT-30 will be primarily used for DTH services, which is true. GSAT-30 is to serve as a replacement to INSAT-4A spacecraft, which is also true, and hence the correct option is C, 2 and 3 only. Now the third question is a potential question in the prelims examination, which reads, Blue Dot network that is often seen in news is related to which of the following? It is an international infrastructure rating mechanism that involves Australia, US and Japan, and hence C is the right option. With this, we come to the end of today's discussion. Now let's take up the question for the day.